And our next speaker is someone who's brave, who's strong, and is willing to stand and share with all of you and everybody watching her life story. What the challenges that have faced her. She lives in Mandeville. She's a mother. She's a friend. She's a wife. She's an amazing person. Please help me introduce, to share her testimony, our friend Kim Shultz.
Good morning to you all. I am so honored to be here, standing here today. Okay. I'm so honored to be standing here today. And pro-life and the pro-life march has always held a very special place in my heart. I was 15 years old when I sat in the waiting room of an abortion clinic here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I sat in this room and went through the process of the pre-appointment. At the time, you had to come into the clinic for the process to be processed through, and then had to wait 3 days or 72 hours afterwards before you could come back for the procedure itself. So sitting in this waiting room is not like what many might picture. It's not a bunch of women standing strong and tall, proud and certain about what they are about to do. It's not like that at all. This room was filled with the thickness of despair, of sadness and shame. I sat in a room with about 12 other girls as we were called one by one for first a blood test to determine what type of medication we were to take for the procedure. Next, we were called in for a so-called counseling session that was nothing like counseling. It felt more like a legalistic meeting where they read off all of the potential side effects that could happen from the procedure. I remember sitting there and feeling so overwhelmed, listening to these side effects and wondering if they were going to be better or worse than the circumstances that I was facing. Finally, I was called into an ultrasound room. It is in this room that I learned that I was 7 weeks and 3 days pregnant. The screen was turned away from me, and I remember laying on this exam table with the technician clicking away and asking her, "Do you see it?" And she looked up from her computer screen and she went, "Mm-hmm." And I said, "Can I see?" And she said, "You want to see?" And I said, "Yeah." She turned that screen around, and I remember this little peanut. I'm going to throw these on the floor because they just keep flying away. You can take them. I remember this little peanut up on the screen. And as the technician continued to click away, my heart started to race. And I built up enough courage to ask her if she would print a picture for me. And at this point, this technician was looking at me like I was crazy. She says, "You want a picture?" And I said, "Yes." Because in this moment, I thought that this picture would be all that I would ever have to remember my baby. So she printed the picture, and I took it and put it in my pocket and walked down the hallway to make an appointment for the abortion. The person that had pressured me into having the abortion stood there with me and made the appointment. Over the next few days, as we waited for the 72-hour waiting period before I could come back, the person that had convinced me to have an abortion and sworn me to secrecy confided in a friend of his own. This family friend, we were at her home. My family member had no idea that she would end up advocating for me. I was sitting in a room alone, and she approached me, and she she grabbed me by my shoulders and she looked me in my eyes and she said, "Do you really want to do this?" And I just remember looking at her and being in shock that someone else knew. And I immediately just hung my head and said no. That intervention that day saved the life of my baby. And the plan was, from that moment on, was to keep and to raise my baby. So that was the plan. But the people around me had different plans, and I was not going to be allowed to stay and live with my parents. So I planned to move to Mississippi and live with my grandparents. But this was a very short-lived plan as reality started to set in that my life was a mess. The brokenness of my family was painful. And so I went to have lunch with my godmother a few days before I had planned to move to Mississippi, and she spoke words to my heart in a way that changed everything. And she said, "Look how messed up your life is, Kim. And your parents were married, and they had jobs, and they had a house and a car and a driver's license and an education." She says, "You're 15 years old. If you love your baby, do you love him enough to give him a chance?" And at that time in my life, everything was so painful. So there was a shift in my heart from that moment that I just wanted to save my baby from the pain that I was living in. So the next thing I know, I'm standing in the maternity home of Lafayette, Louisiana. I was to go and live there for the next 5.5 months until I was to give birth. I was now the problem of Catholic social services. These were the most somber, crushing, and lonely days of my life. I cried myself to sleep every night, terrified. Through Catholic social services, I was able to make a plan for open adoption, where they were able to help me find an amazing family that was everything that I could ever dream of having in my own family. But I got to give that to my baby boy. I learned that I was having a son. Over the next few months, I got to know this family and love and fall in love with them. My belly grew bigger and bigger, and I fell more and more in love with my baby boy. And that gave me strength every day to keep pushing. On October 1st, 1998, I gave birth to a healthy, bouncing 8-pound baby boy. He was so loved. My heart grew by 1,000 times that day, but it also broke into 1,000 pieces. Adoption is hard, but adoption is beautiful. Just because life hurts like hell sometimes doesn't mean that it's not God's will for you. Just because it's hard doesn't mean that God's not right there with you. I chose open adoption for my baby, and because of that, I got to watch him grow. I got to see him loved. I got to see the most amazing thing was to see all of the joy that he brought to his family and to his parents. I got to love him, and I got to see that his eyes are like mine, and he gets to love me back. I just want to say that abortion is death. Abortion is not a choice. And to girls out there like me that are facing an unplanned pregnancy, that are scared and alone, I want you to know that there is a choice, and there is hope. A choice for life, for you and for your baby. And if you can't raise your baby, even with the help that's offered out there through crisis pregnancy centers and like agencies like Louisiana Right to Life, adoption is beautiful. And because I chose life, I also have the honor and privilege to invite my not so little baby boy Matthew up on stage with you today. So would you please welcome Matthew with me?